Hey everyone! Before we dive into today's story, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt taken for granted by the people closest to you? Sometimes, the hardest lessons come from those we love most. This story is about Eleanor, a 68-year-old woman who thought she was building a legacy for her family, only to discover they saw her as nothing more than a convenient ATM. What would you do if you discovered your own children were systematically stealing from you while excluding you from their lives? Drop a comment and let me know your thoughts, and stick around, because this story will make you think twice about blind trust and the price of unconditional love. The notification alert from my phone cut through the morning stillness like shattered glass. I was sipping coffee at my kitchen table, watching the autumn leaves drift past my window in lazy spirals, when those words appeared on my screen. Words that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. Eleanor, we have decided the anniversary party should be immediate family only. Hope you understand. Jessica I stared at the message until the letters blurred together, my reading glasses fogging with the sudden heat of shock. Immediate family. The anniversary party for my late husband's parents, the grandparents who had stepped in to raise Michael when his father walked out on us 15 years ago. The same celebration I would been planning, organizing, and funding for the past 15 years since their passing, keeping their memory alive with elaborate dinners and heartfelt toasts. Suddenly, inexplicably, I wasn't immediate family anymore. My hands trembled as I set down my coffee cup, the ceramic rattling against the saucer like chattering teeth. The same hands that had written the check for the beautiful colonial house Michael and Jessica now called home. The same hands that had signed over my retirement savings to give them a fresh start without debt, without struggle, without any of the hardships I would endured as a young mother. Apparently, I was good enough to be their personal bank, their financial safety net, but not good enough to share their dinner table or celebrate the people who had helped shape the man my son became. The second message arrived before I could even process the weight of the first, each word landing like a physical blow to my chest. Fight it is just easier this way, with the new baby coming and all. You know how stressful these events can be for someone your age. Jessica easier. For Jessica, everything in life was about what made her existence simpler, more comfortable, more convenient. Like when she had convinced me to put her name on my checking account just for emergencies. Mom, Eleanor, you know how these things can be. Like when she had suggested I update my will just to streamline things when the time comes, heaven forbid. But we should be prepared. All those times she had smiled sweetly and called me Mom Eleanor with such genuine warmth, while quietly, methodically rearranging my entire life to suit her preferences and future plans. I stood slowly, my 68-year-old joints protesting after sitting too long in the morning chill. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in around me, pressing down with the weight of a truth I would been too blind to see. Framed photos lined the windowsill, Michael's high school graduation, where he would thank me in his speech, their elegant wedding where I would walk him down the aisle, the house blessing ceremony where they would both thank me with tears streaming down their faces. Now those memories felt hollow, like beautiful lies I would been too desperate to believe. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the wooden table with an insistence that made my stomach lurch. This time it was Michael himself. "Facery, Mom. You know how Jessica gets when she is pregnant. Her hormones are all over the place. Maybe next year we can do something bigger. Asterisk maybe next year." As if this wasn't about respect, about dignity, about treating your mother like she mattered enough to include in the family she would help build. As if I should be grateful for their scraps of attention whenever it was convenient, whenever it didn't interfere with their carefully curated life. I walked through my modest two-bedroom apartment, my fingers trailing along the furniture I would kept when I downsized 3 years ago. Simple pieces, nothing fancy or elaborate. The faded blue sofa where I would spend countless evenings alone, watching television shows that couldn't fill the silence. The small dining table where I ate solitary meals, surrounded by empty chairs that used to hold my family. The narrow bookshelf lined with novels I would read and reread, desperate for any escape from the growing loneliness. I would sold the family home, the 4-bedroom house where Michael had grown up, where Harold and I had planned to spend our golden years, where every room held memories of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and family dinners filled with laughter to give Michael and Jessica their dream house. I would told myself I was happy to live smaller, that seeing them succeed was worth any personal sacrifice, that being a grandmother would fill the empty spaces in my shrinking world. The irony wasn't lost on me now. I would given up the home where I would been truly happy to help them create a home where I would never be welcome. But standing in my living room now, surrounded by the remnants of a life I would systematically dismantled for their benefit, I saw the truth with devastating clarity. I hadn't just given them a house, I would given them my future, my security, my dignity, my sense of self-worth, and they would accept it all while slowly, methodically, cutting me out of their lives like an unwanted growth. The irony was absolutely devastating. The woman who had raised Michael alone after his father abandoned us when the boy was just 3 years old, who had worked 2 jobs, one at the hospital and another cleaning offices at night, to put him through college, who had emptied her savings account and cashed in her pension early to give him everything he would ever wanted. That woman was now too much trouble, too much stress, too much inconvenience to include in a simple family dinner. I sank into my favorite armchair, the one piece of furniture I would absolutely refuse to part with because it had been Harold's reading chair. The burgundy leather was worn soft from decades of use, cracked along the armrests where his hands had rested every evening as he read the newspaper or worked on crossword puzzles. I could still picture him there, his reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose, occasionally looking up to share an interesting news story or ask my opinion about a particularly challenging clue. He would been gone for 2 years now, but sometimes I still expected to see him settling into that chair with his evening routine. My late husband would have seen through Jessica's calculated manipulations from the very first day she walked into our lives with her perfect smile and practiced charm. He would always been naturally suspicious of people who smiled too much and asked for too little until they asked for everything. "Watch out for the ones who make themselves indispensable," he used to say. "They are usually planning to become irreplaceable." He would have protected me from this heartbreak, would have seen the warning signs I would been too lonely and desperate to recognize. But Harold wasn't here anymore, and I would been navigating this treacherous family dynamic entirely alone, making mistake after mistake in my desperate attempt to remain connected to the only family I had left. The apartment fell silent, except for the steady ticking of the mantel clock, a wedding gift from Harold's mother 45 years ago. In that profound quiet, something fundamental shifted inside me. The part of me that always made excuses for their behavior, that always found ways to justify their increasing coldness and distance, simply stopped functioning. Like a switch being flipped off, like a light bulb burning out after years of faithful service. They thought I was too old to fight back, too dependent on their occasional phone calls and holiday visits to risk making waves, too desperate for connection, for relevance, for proof that I still mattered in this world. They would counted on my maternal desperation to stay connected, to remain involved in their lives, regardless of how poorly they treated me. But they had miscalculated badly. I reached for my phone with newly steady hands and called my oldest friend, Ruth Henley. We would known each other since our children were in elementary school together, had weathered divorces and deaths and disappointments side by side for over 30 years. She would been my maid of honor when I married Harold, had held my hand through Michael's difficult teenage years, had brought casseroles and tissues during Harold's final illness. If anyone would understand the complexity of this situation, it would be Ruth. She answered on the second ring, her voice immediately alert with concern. "Ellie, you sound strange. Honey, what is wrong? You never call this early in the morning unless something's really bothering you." I told her everything, my words tumbling out in a rush of pain and confusion. The messages, the exclusion, the years of increasingly small slights I would ignored and rationalized away. The way Jessica had slowly but systematically isolated me from their daily lives while continuing to accept my financial support. The way Michael had become a stranger, someone who communicated with me only through text messages and avoided direct conversation whenever possible. Ruth listened without interrupting, her silence speaking volumes about what she would probably suspected for months, but had been too polite to voice. "How long have they been treating you like this?" she asked finally, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Getting worse for months," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper, but I kept telling myself it was just stress from the pregnancy, just life getting complicated, just growing pains as they adjust to being a real family. "Honey," Ruth said gently, but with an edge of urgency that made my chest tighten, "when is the last time you actually checked your bank statements? Really looked at them, line by line?" My stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. "Jessica handles most of the online banking now. She said it was easier for someone tech-savvy to manage all the digital payments and automatic transfers." Ellie Ruth's voice was sharp, cutting through my explanations like a knife. "You need to get off this phone right now and log into every single account you have. Check everything: checking, savings, investments, credit cards, and if anything looks wrong, even slightly suspicious, you call me back immediately." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird desperate for escape. Ruth wasn't the type to panic over nothing, wasn't given to drama or overreaction. If she was worried about my financial situation, I pulled out my laptop with hands that had developed a noticeable tremor, my fingers fumbling with the power button as waves of anxiety washed over me. It took 3 attempts to remember my banking password. Jessica had insisted on changing it to something more secure last month, something with numbers and symbols that she claimed would protect me from identity theft. "These hackers target seniors specifically," she would said, with such genuine concern. "We need to make sure your accounts are absolutely bulletproof." When the screen finally loaded after what felt like an eternity, I felt like I was looking at a stranger's account, at financial records that couldn't possibly belong to me. Small withdrawals scattered throughout each month like a deliberate pattern. Regular transfers to accounts I didn't recognize with names that sounded legitimate, but meant nothing to me. Payments to companies whose services I would never requested or authorized. Each transaction was labeled with innocent, reasonable descriptions that would never raise suspicion during a casual review: household maintenance, medical expenses, grocery allowances, emergency repairs, property management fees, insurance adjustments. But as I examined each entry more carefully, the deception became obvious. I hadn't authorized any medical expenses beyond my own insurance copays, which I paid directly at my doctor's office. I bought my own groceries with cash or my debit card, carefully tracking every purchase in my household budget notebook. And what kind of household maintenance required $3,000 every single month for a house that was barely 3 years old? My vision blurred as I scrolled deeper into the transaction history, watching months of systematic drainage unfold before my eyes. 6 solid months of my money, flowing out of my accounts into mysterious destinations I would never approved. All of it authorized with Jessica's digital signature, made possible by the power of attorney she would convinced me to grant her, just in case of emergencies. "Mom, Eleanor, you know how quickly things can change at our age." The emergency, I realized with crystal clear, devastating clarity, had been her urgent need for my money. I called Ruth back with fingers that could barely manage to dial the numbers. "How bad is it?" she asked, without any preamble. $17,000, I whispered, the words scraping my throat raw. "Maybe more, Ruth. I think they have been systematically stealing from me." "Pack an overnight bag," she said immediately, her voice brooking no argument. "You are staying with me tonight, and first thing tomorrow morning, we are going to see my lawyer." I wanted to argue, to make excuses, to find some way this could all be an innocent misunderstanding born of good intentions and poor communication. But the numbers on my computer screen told a story that couldn't be explained away with wishful thinking. Jessica hadn't just taken my money, she would taken it systematically, carefully, with the methodical precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had been planning it for a very long time. "Ellie, Are you still there? I am here, I managed, my voice sounding hollow and strange in my own ears. Ruth, what if I am wrong? What if there is a reasonable explanation for all of this? Then we will find that out tomorrow, she said firmly. But honey, you have been making excuses for their behavior for years. When is the last time you made them explain themselves to you? I couldn't remember. Every question I would ever raised about their increasing distance, their financial requests, their casual dismissal of my feelings, had been met with Jessica's wounded tears and Michael's defensive anger. I would learn to stay quiet, to accept their version of events, to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they were willing to spare for the woman who would given them everything. That night, at Ruth's cozy house, in the better part of town, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of her guest room. My phone sat silent on the nightstand beside me, the screen dark and lifeless. No calls asking where I was, no texts checking if I was okay, no concerned messages wondering why I hadn't answered their anniversary party exclusion with my usual gracious acceptance. They hadn't even noticed I was gone. The next morning, Ruth's lawyer, Mr. Samuel Peterson, spread my financial statements across his mahogany conference table, like evidence at a crime scene. His office was everything you would expect from a successful attorney: floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with legal volumes, framed diplomas and certificates covering one wall, a massive desk that spoke of authority and experience. But his manner was gentle and patient as he reviewed my documents, occasionally making notes or highlighting specific transactions. His expression grew progressively grimmer with each page he reviewed, his lips pressing into a thin line of professional disapproval that made my chest tighten with dread. "Mrs. Morrison," he said finally, removing his reading glasses and looking directly into my eyes with the kind of serious expression that meant bad news was coming. "This isn't confusion or mismanagement or even poor financial planning. This is systematic financial elder abuse, executed with a level of sophistication that suggests extensive premeditation. Your daughter-in-law has been using your power of attorney to funnel money into accounts she controls exclusively, and she has been doing it in a way specifically designed to avoid detection." The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing with the force of absolute truth that I would been avoiding for months. But she always said it was for household expenses, for things that would benefit all of us in the long run. She showed me receipts, invoices, explanations for everything. Those receipts were likely fabricated. "Mrs. Morrison, household expenses don't get deposited into personal investment accounts registered under a single name," Mr. Peterson said firmly, sliding another document across the polished table with practiced efficiency. "Look at this pattern here, and here, and here. She has been moving money out of your checking account into a savings account under her name only. Then from there into what appears to be a high-risk cryptocurrency portfolio that you have absolutely no legal access to." Ruth leaned forward in her chair, her face flushed with anger. "Can we prove this legally?" "Absolutely. The paper trail is clear and undeniable. Mrs. Morrison, I need to ask you directly. Did you authorize any investments in digital currency or cryptocurrency?" "I don't even know what that means," I said honestly, feeling foolish and naive. "I can barely manage my email, let alone understand computer money." Mr. Peterson nodded grimly, his expression softening slightly. "That is exactly what I thought. Mrs. Morrison, your daughter-in-law has been gambling with your retirement money in extremely volatile markets. If these investments fail, and many of them do, you will lose everything. And if they succeed, based on how these accounts are structured, you will never see a penny of the profits." The room seemed to spin around me as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. All those months of Jessica's sweet smiles, her helpful offers to take care of the complicated financial stuff, her gentle insistence that I didn't need to worry about all those confusing numbers and technical details. She would been systematically robbing me while I thanked her for her kindness and support. "What can we do to stop this?" Ruth asked, her voice tight with protective fury. Mr. Peterson pulled out a fresh legal pad and began making notes. "First, We revoke all powers of attorney immediately and freeze all accounts. Then we trace every unauthorized transaction and gather evidence for potential criminal charges. Mrs. Morrison, when you transferred the house to them, did you gift it outright, or is your name still on the deed somewhere? I signed it over completely, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jessica said it would be better for tax purposes, that it would save everyone money in the long run. When exactly did you sign those transfer documents? I thought back to that confusing afternoon filled with endless paperwork and Jessica's patient explanations. About 8 months ago, maybe 9, but there were so many documents, so much legal language I didn't really understand. Did you have independent legal representation when you signed those papers? Jessica said we didn't need separate lawyers, that it would just complicate things unnecessarily. She brought a notary to the house, said it would save time and money, Mr. Peterson, and Ruth exchanged meaningful looks that made my stomach clench with new anxiety. Mrs. Morrison, the lawyer said carefully, choosing his words with obvious precision, I believe you may have been the victim of what we call undue influence. If we can prove you weren't properly counseled about the full implications of that property transfer, we might be able to challenge it in court. Hope flickered in my chest like a tiny candle flame. Do you really think that is possible? It will not be easy, and it will not be quick, but given the clear pattern of financial abuse we are seeing here, a court might very well rule that the house transfer was part of the same systematic scheme, especially if we can demonstrate that they pressured you to sign when you were in a particularly vulnerable emotional state. I thought about the dark months immediately following Harold's death, when I would been drowning in grief and crushing loneliness. How Jessica had been so helpful during that time, so caring and supportive, so eager to take burdens off my shoulders and make difficult decisions easier. How Michael had seemed so grateful for her assistance, so relieved that someone was taking proper care of Mom during this difficult time. They waited until I was at my weakest, I said slowly. Understanding dawning like a cold sunrise, until I was so desperate to feel needed and useful, that I would have agreed to almost anything. Ruth reached across the table and squeezed my hand firmly. They targeted you, honey. This wasn't love or family obligation. This was a carefully planned con game. Mr. Peterson was already making extensive notes, his pen moving rapidly across the legal pad. I will need to bring in a private investigator to document the complete timeline of this relationship. If we can show a clear pattern of isolation and manipulation leading up to the house transfer, we will have a very strong case. How long will this process take? I asked, dreading the answer. Several months at minimum, possibly longer, depending on what the investigation uncovers. And Mrs. Morrison, I need you to understand something very clearly. Pursuing this course of action will almost certainly destroy your relationship with your son permanently. Are you fully prepared for that possibility? I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had rocked Michael to sleep as a colicky baby, that had applauded enthusiastically at every school play and soccer game, that had written check after check to give him the opportunities and advantages I would never had. The same hands he would apparently decided belonged to someone too old and irrelevant to include in his carefully managed family celebrations. He destroyed our relationship when he chose her manipulation over my well-being, I said quietly, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. I am just finally refusing to pretend otherwise anymore. Mr. Peterson nodded approvingly. Then let's get started immediately. The investigation moved much faster than I had expected, propelled by what the private investigator called an unusually clear paper trail and a suspect who was either extremely arrogant or extremely careless. Sandra Wells was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who specialized in financial crimes against the elderly, with over 20 years of experience tracking down family members who preyed on their own relatives. What she uncovered in just 2 weeks made my blood run cold with the scope and sophistication of the deception. Jessica had been planning this systematic theft for over 2 years, researching elder financial abuse techniques on specialized websites and forums dedicated to financial manipulation. She had carefully studied the legal vulnerabilities of elderly women, learning exactly how much money could be moved without triggering automatic bank reviews or government oversight. She had methodically isolated me from other family members and old friends by spreading carefully crafted stories about my increasing confusion and concerning memory lapses, stories that made people reluctant to visit or call me directly, instead funneling all communication through her. She had even consulted with multiple financial advisors about the most efficient ways to liquidate an elderly person's assets, presenting herself as a concerned daughter-in-law seeking advice about managing her mother-in-law's declining cognitive abilities. She documented everything. Sandra told me during one of our regular meetings at Mr. Peterson's office, sliding a thick folder across the conference table. Bank records, investment portfolios, insurance policies, property assessments. She has been building a complete financial profile of your assets for over 18 months. She even took out additional life insurance policies on you, listing herself as the beneficiary. She has done this before, Sandra continued, her voice taking on the grim tone of someone who had seen too much human cruelty. Different state, different family, but the pattern is almost identical down to the smallest details. The same isolation tactics, the same financial manipulation strategies, even the same cryptocurrency investment schemes. You mean she is? I couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't bring myself to say the word that would make this nightmare completely real. A predator, Mrs. Morrison. She specifically targets older women with substantial assets and adult children who are either actively complicit or willfully blind to what is happening. Your son isn't her first victim, and unfortunately, you wouldn't have been her last if we hadn't caught this when we did. The revelation that Michael might be as much a victim as I was should have brought some measure of relief or comfort. Instead, it made everything infinitely worse. Because it meant that the son I had raised with such love and sacrifice, the boy I had protected and provided for through every challenge, had been so easily manipulated and controlled by a woman he would known for only 3 years. It meant that somehow, despite everything I would try to teach him about character and integrity, I had failed him more completely than I would ever imagined possible. But as the evidence continued to mount week after week, something unexpected began to happen within me. The anger and hurt that had been eating away at my soul like acid started to crystallize into something cleaner, sharper, more purposeful, a sense of mission. Jessica thought she had found the perfect mark, a lonely widow with significant assets and a desperate psychological need to feel relevant and needed. She had counted on my maternal instincts to override my common sense indefinitely. She had assumed I would rather be systematically robbed than face the alternative of complete abandonment. She was profoundly wrong. 3 weeks into the investigation, Mr. Peterson called me with news that made my hands shake with something that wasn't fear. We have more than enough evidence to file serious criminal charges, he said, his voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. Financial elder abuse, wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering. The cryptocurrency investments alone represent multiple felonies. Mrs. Morrison, if you are ready to proceed with this, I can have the arrest warrants issued by tomorrow morning. I thought about the anniversary party I wouldn't be attending, about all the future celebrations they would exclude me from, about all the grandchildren I would never really know, about all the years of loneliness stretching endlessly ahead. Then I thought about other elderly women who might cross Jessica's path in the future, other mothers who might lose their life savings to her practiced smile and expertly crafted tears. Do it, I said without hesitation. The arrests happened on a Tuesday morning while I was having coffee with Ruth, trying to maintain some semblance of normal routine. Sandra called me with the details as they unfolded. Jessica had been taken into custody at the house I had bought them, led away in handcuffs while Michael stood helplessly in the driveway in his pajamas, crying like a lost child who couldn't understand why his perfect world was suddenly falling apart. He called me that same afternoon, his voice cracking with panic and desperation. The first direct contact I would had with him since those dismissive text messages about the anniversary party. and suddenly, he remembered how to use the phone when his comfortable world started collapsing around him. "Mom, you have to drop these charges immediately. Please, I am begging you. This is insane. Jessica's 7 months pregnant. She cannot possibly go to jail in her condition. The stress alone could harm the baby. She made some mistakes with the money management. I will admit that, but she didn't mean any real harm. She was just trying to help secure our future, to make sure we could provide for the baby when it comes. She got confused about the accounts. Maybe made some poor investment choices, but she is not a criminal. Please, Mom, you know she loves you. We both do. This is just a huge misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. She meant to steal every single penny I had." "Michael," I said with a calmness that surprised. Even me, my voice steady and clear in a way it hadn't been for years. "And on some level, whether you want to admit it or not, so did you. That is not true. I didn't know the specifics of what she was doing with the financial management. She handled all that stuff because she is better with computers and investment strategies. I trusted her to take care of things properly." "You knew I was giving you money I couldn't afford to give," I interrupted, my voice gaining strength with each word. "You knew I had moved into that tiny apartment so you could have a beautiful house with granite countertops and hardwood floors. You knew I was eating crackers and canned soup for dinner most nights because I would spend my grocery money on your mortgage payments and home improvements. You knew I would sold my car and started taking the bus because maintaining a vehicle was too expensive after I would emptied my savings for you. And you never once asked if I was okay, if I was struggling, if I needed anything. You never even thanked me properly." The silence stretched between us like a chasm that could never be bridged, filled with years of unspoken resentment and willful blindness. "I never asked you to sacrifice everything for us," he said finally, his voice small and defensive. "No," I agreed. "You just accepted it all without question, took it for granted. Let me empty my life savings. While you planned expensive vacations I wasn't invited to, and elaborate parties I wasn't good enough to attend. Mom, please. I know we made mistakes, but we are still family. I am not your mom anymore, Michael," I said, the words coming out steady and clear. "I am just someone you and your wife used to steal money from." I hung up the phone and immediately turned it off, unplugging it from the charger for good measure. The legal process stretched across 8 long months. 8 months of depositions and hearings and lawyers' meetings. 8 months of discovering just how thoroughly and systematically Jessica had infiltrated every aspect of my life. How completely she had planned to strip me of everything I owned. She had even taken out a substantial life insurance policy on me, listing herself as the primary beneficiary. The house sale was finalized on a crisp December morning. The papers signed in Mr. Peterson's office, while snow began to fall outside the windows. The same house I had sacrificed everything to provide for them was sold by court order to pay restitution for what they had stolen. The remainder of the proceeds went into a legally protected account that Jessica could never access, never manipulate, never touch. I used part of the money to buy a small but comfortable condo in a senior-friendly complex near Ruth's neighborhood. Nothing fancy or elaborate, but it was mine. Completely, utterly, undeniably mine. Michael sent a generic greeting card at Christmas with no return address, just his signature and the words "I am sorry for everything." I threw it away without reading it a second time. Jessica received a 3-year prison sentence and was ordered to pay full restitution. Michael filed for divorce before the baby was born and moved back to live with his father's sister in another state, essentially disappearing from my life as completely as if he had never existed. The baby, a little girl I will never meet, was born in February and placed in foster care until suitable family members could be located. I think about that innocent child sometimes, about the legacy of mistrust and deception Jessica has left behind. But then I remember that some lessons in life are worth learning, even when they cause tremendous pain. Ruth and I have coffee together every morning now, sitting at her kitchen table, or mine depending on our mood and the weather. We plan trips I can actually afford. Visit places I have always wanted to see but never allowed myself to enjoy. Last month we took a long weekend in Savannah, wandering through the historic district and eating at restaurants I never would have considered when every spare dollar was earmarked for Michael and Jessica's needs. Next month we are planning a cruise to Alaska, my first real vacation in over 15 years. I volunteer twice a week at the county senior center, helping other elderly women recognize the warning signs of financial abuse before it is too late. It has become my mission, my way of turning this painful experience into something meaningful and protective for others. Last month, I helped an 80-year-old widow named Margaret discover that her grandson had been systematically forging her Social Security checks for over a year, using the money to fund his gambling addiction, while she struggled to pay for her medications. The week before that, I sat with a 75-year-old man whose daughter was trying to force him into an expensive nursing home so she could sell his house and keep the profits, even though he was perfectly capable of living independently with minimal assistance. Just yesterday, a woman my age came to me in tears because her son had convinced her to refinance her paid-off house to help with his business expenses, and now she was facing foreclosure while he would disappear with the money. Sometimes they listen to my warnings and take protective action, sometimes they don't. Too afraid of family conflict to protect themselves, too desperate to maintain connection with their children to risk confrontation. But I keep trying, because I understand something now that I didn't before this experience fundamentally changed me. Silence isn't peace, it is surrender. And I am completely done surrendering anything to anyone who doesn't value what I have to offer. The anniversary party happened without me, of course. I know this because Jessica's younger sister posted dozens of photos on social media before realizing I could still see them. Michael looked thin and exhausted, hollow-eyed and defeated. The house looked empty and sterile, despite being filled with people, like a stage set rather than a real home. But I was having dinner with Ruth that same evening, laughing over old stories from our youth, and planning our upcoming trip to Scotland that we would been talking about for years, but never quite managed to organize. For the first time in my entire adult life, I was spending money on myself without feeling guilty or selfish about it. I looked wonderful in the photos. Ruth took that night, relaxed and genuinely happy, free in a way I would never experienced before. The elderly woman in those pictures bore absolutely no resemblance to the frightened, desperate creature I would been for so many painful years. This woman had survived profound betrayal and chosen to thrive anyway. She had lost a son but found herself in the process. Not a bad trade when you really think about it. The doorbell rang as I was finishing my morning coffee and reading the travel section of the newspaper. Just like in the old days when crisis and chaos seemed to follow me everywhere I went. But this time, when I opened the door with unhurried steps, it was just the postal carrier, with a package I would been eagerly expecting. A comprehensive travel guidebook about Scotland, ordered with my own money from my own account that no one else could access or manipulate. I signed for it with completely steady hands and smiled warmly at the young postal worker. "Planning a big trip?" she asked cheerfully, noticing the colorful cover. "Yes, indeed," I said with genuine enthusiasm. "My first real vacation in over 20 years." She smiled back with obvious pleasure. "That is absolutely wonderful, madam. You deserve it. You deserve it." Such simple words. But they landed in my heart like a benediction from heaven. Because for the first time in my entire life, I actually believed them completely. I closed the door gently and looked around my little condo with fresh eyes. Sunlight streamed through windows I had chosen myself. Across furniture I had selected according to my own preferences, onto floors that belonged only to me. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was deeply, profoundly peaceful. My phone sat quietly on the kitchen counter. Notifications turned completely off. If someone needed to reach me urgently, they could call Ruth. Everyone else could wait until I felt like being available to them. That was another crucial lesson I had learned through this painful experience. Availability is a precious gift, not a basic obligation. And some people had definitively proven they didn't deserve that gift. I opened the Scotland travel book and began planning an adventure that belonged entirely to me. No one to consult about preferences, no one to accommodate or compromise with, no one whose approval I needed to seek before making decisions, just an elderly woman who had finally learned the profound difference between being alone and being gloriously, magnificently free. And for the first time in many, many years, free felt absolutely perfect. What do you think about Eleanor's choice? Should she have given Michael and Jessica another chance? Or was she absolutely right to prioritize her own well-being and safety? These family situations are never as simple as they appear on the surface. And I know many of you have faced similar dilemmas with your own relatives. Was Eleanor too harsh, or was this the only way to protect herself and other potential victims? I love hearing your perspectives on these complex relationships. Every family dynamic is different, and there is no one-size-fits-all solution to elder abuse. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family loyalty and self-protection? Have you seen warning signs in your own family that you weren't sure how to address? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else who is struggling with a similar situation. And if this story resonated with you, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more stories that will make you think deeply about the relationships in your own life. Share this video with someone who might need to hear Eleanor's story. Sometimes we all need a reminder that self-respect and self-protection aren't selfish. They are necessary. What other family drama stories would you like to see? Let me know in the comments, and I will make sure to cover the topics that matter most to you.